Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From a state of 1.7 million people, West Virginia has 39,000 people living with Alzheimer's disease. Patients that live in the mountainous rural communities of West Virginia face significant barriers in accessing primary health care, let alone specialized clinical trials. In a 2019 study of one of their clinical trials, WVU's neurology department found that more than 25% of patients had to travel more than 100 miles one way to participate in the trial. Furthermore, patients with neurodegenerative disorders, such as Alzheimer's, depend on family members or a caretaker to bring them to their clinical trial visits, which only increases the barriers for patients. That's why CMS's National Coverage Determination for Medicare coverage of the Alzheimer's drug Aduhelm and all future drugs in its class is so worrisome. I'm concerned that rural patients won't be able to access an entire class of drugs just because of where they live. Mr. Gonzalez, you touched on the difficulty of having to travel long distances to access tests and studies. Can you tell a little bit some more of the difficulties that patients do face in their ability to participate in these trials?
Sure. Thank you very much for asking the question. It is extremely difficult, and I'm going to go on a different route.
Just do it quickly.
When I have to go somewhere, my wife is with me, so there's two of us each time we're going somewhere. You have costs in travel, you have costs in hotels, then you have cost in meals, you have costs in what you're going to wear, and then at the end of the day, there's the cost in me. There's what's going to happen to me. Every time I travel, it's about 2 days to get myself back to normal.
It makes you tired.
It does,
I
tired and
that.
cold and shaky.
Yes. Continuing with the theme of policies which are disproportionately affect rural patients, I'm also concerned about CMMI's accelerating clinical evidence model. This model slashes Medicare payments for drugs approved through the FDA's highly successful accelerated approval pathways until they complete traditional approval. This is entirely nonsensical, and I can't really understand why they do that. Mr. Okon, smaller medical providers, including oncology centers in rural areas, typically operate on a very slim margin. Don't you think that this attempt to slow reimbursements of accelerated approved drugs will have a disproportionate impact on these rural providers and therefore their patients?
Absolutely. It's amazing, Congressman Miller, that the consolidation that impact of federal policy already has had in independent providers and that consolidation, especially in rural areas. So what happens? They close their doors, and then patients don't have access. And the problem is, specifically with this one model, is that, again, it puts, as I've said, it puts providers, us as hostages, in the middle between the government and the drug company, whether it be the IRA negotiation or here, where if a product doesn't have one clinical trial for one indication, they haven't done it properly, they're going to knock down reimbursement. And you knock down reimbursement, we have seen this, history has demonstrated it, you not only have cancer clinics, but other providers that close, and as a result, who suffers the most? Patients in rural areas.
You're right.
And also patients who we
I have one more
target
question.
as health disparities.
One more question.
Yes.
Okay, because you've explained that due to the IRA, drug companies probably won't invest in expanded indication research when a drug will be target on the government's negotiation. Therefore, this law will certainly limit research and development for new indications. What impact does this have on patients, specifically cancer patients?
Well, that's the problem, is we talk about drugs as if they're the same, whereas in cancer drugs, you're talking about different indications developed over the life cycle of the drug. I'm not apologizing for the pharmaceutical industry. We have a problem, as Dr. Murphy said, with high cost of drugs, but the problem is, as you get closer to this negotiation, you would not put funds forward to study a new indication, especially indications that deal with pediatric cancers. So you have a real problem in terms of the nature of drugs and life cycle development, especially when you talk about cancer drugs, as opposed to drugs that may have just one indication always.
Thank you. I yield back.